Welcome to the Jaren Jarvis channel. I am Jaren Jarvis. Today, I would like to introduce to you, life on an outback cattle station backpackers at the Billabong. The Screaming Men. Pixie Circles. Old Stone Knees. The Satan Stones. Sorry for the gap, folks. We had a cattle drive to do, anyway. This one is a pretty recent and tragic story, one that made a big impact on the farm as a community. Way out here, we don't get a lot of tourists. There are more famous places, more noteworthy sights, than most of what you can find around our place. That said, we do get a steady trickle of backpackers, generally the kind who have hired or bought a crappy old van and just pick a direction and start driving. Often we put these folks up at the farm. We might even employ some of them, cash in hand, for a few weeks. Works for us and for them. We get some extra labor when we need it, and they get a bit more cash to carry on their trip. It's not technically legal, but way out here you learn to bend the rules and take any extra help you can get. I guess we normally see 4 or 5 backpackers every month or so. 2 summers ago we had a group of 4 Germans come through the place in a beaten old Mitsubishi van. They had asked around town, looking for a good spot to camp away from the world for a week or so, and eventually had been sent up to our place. Along one of the small rivers flowing through the station is a series of billabongs, almost completely unspoiled and well beyond the areas where we regularly run cattle. They were friendly enough, 2 couples around my age, and Dad loves meeting travelers, so he insisted they have lunch with us while we showed them where to go. He's never really been off the farm apart from a few trips to the city, and I think he's fascinated by the idea of traveling. He chatted with them for a couple of hours over a few beers, sharing stories, before he pulled out the map and showed them the best way to get to the billabongs. As they prepared to leave, he gave them the same warning he had always given me: "Oh, and just be sure you stay well clear of the furthest billabong," pointing to a spot on the map. It's got really steep rocky walls around it and it can flood without rain anywhere near here. It's also the deepest of the billabongs by far, and it flows through a narrow chasm at the downstream end. You can get sucked under by the current while it looks glass calm, and there's all sorts of shit to get tangled in at the bottom. Walk along the walls at the top if you like. There's a good track that runs along about 20 meters above the water, but never go down to the water's edge and definitely don't swim in it. They nodded their assent and we all shook hands and sent them on their way. They'd be out there for at least a week and they promised to check back in on their way out, so we went about our day as the van trundled off in a cloud of dust. It was just before sundown 6 days later that one of the women came stumbling back into camp, wearing nothing but bikini bottoms, covered in dust and blood and sobbing, her feet torn to shreds. It must have taken her a full day or more to follow the road back to the farmhouse on foot. She was clearly in shock, and I quickly ran to her as she collapsed to the ground, carrying her the last few hundred meters into the farmhouse. Her appearance set off an explosion of activity. Dad helped me get her into a cool bath to clean her injuries and combat a full day exposed to the blazing summer sun, wincing as the water found her wounds and she screamed. He sent farmhands to call an ambulance and gather medical supplies, and the housemaid to find a gown or something for her to wear when the ambulance did arrive. We bathed her as best we could, but she was clearly not in her right mind with heat stroke and shock, and she made it difficult. She said nothing we could interpret, although she kept repeating words. They were all in German. Dad and I stayed with her until the ambulance arrived about 90 minutes later, and once she was safely off to hospital, Dad grabbed me by the shoulders. "Go and get a couple of the boys and meet me at the shed as quick as you can. Oh, and grab some rifles." I frowned, but the urgency in his voice snapped me into gear and we were soon bouncing off down the road towards the billabongs. Dad was shaking his head and muttering as I guided the 4WD over the rough road as fast as I could. Even with all the weirdness out here, I didn't understand the rifles. It was clear they weren't just in case if we all had one. And if Dad, infirm as he was coming along, I felt like something really bad had happened. Dad confirmed my fears when he directed me towards that last billabong, but he was slightly reticent when I asked him about it. "I didn't tell you kids to stay away from that billabong because of the current." That was all he would say, for the moment. As we came over the final rise and down the steep embankment to the Billabong, my heart leapt straight into my throat. Lying on its side, roof smashed in and surrounded by shattered glass, was the backpacker's van. I shot Dad a questioning look and he sighed. This Billabong is home to something big. I've never seen it myself, but my father told me he used to lose cattle to it all the time. When it took a drover, the Billabong became off limits. That's why we don't run them out here anymore, and that's why I always told you kids to stay away. But why not tell the truth? With all the shit that goes on out here, we'd have believed it for sure. Because of everyone else who comes out here who isn't familiar with the way it works out here. I needed to be sure that you kids would tell the same story I did. Kids talk, and if people hear stories of monsters they'll eventually be curious enough to check it out. Tell them there's a better than even chance they'll drown, and folks are smart enough to stay away. Normally. He nodded to the trashed van. This Billabong is far enough away from the others we've never had a problem. I should have known someone would be stupid enough to come down here one day. Cautiously, we got out of the car and surveyed the scene. The van had clearly been smashed into from the waterside with tremendous force, but it was what lay just behind it that saw the bile rise in my throat. I live on a farm. I've seen plenty of death. Mostly animals, sure, but there was also a time where we lost a farmhand in an accident on a four-wheeler. Still, nothing can prepare you for the sight of a human torso, mangled and severed messily through the midriff. I felt dizzy and ill and anguished by the carnage on the shore of the Billabong. Dad squeezed my shoulder gently, trying to be reassuring in the face of utter horror. I forced myself to move past the shattered body of the poor backpacker and follow the men further around the Billabong. We were careful not to get too close to the water, I noticed as I mirrored the others. The Billabong itself was eerily dark, the water stained almost black by tannins from the surrounding vegetation. One of the guys pointed to the shore, a little distance to our right amongst a tangle of roots, and I noticed something pale floating on the slick black water. A severed arm. I briefly wondered if there was a croc in the Billabong, but that didn't make any sense. We're way too far south. What the fuck did this? I breathed, more to myself than anyone. Dad shook his head. This is my fault. I should have stopped people from coming out here altogether. I thought. The sentence died in his throat as he choked back tears. In all my life I have only ever seen my father, a tough man of the land, shed a tear 3 times. His remorse here was almost palpable. I was staring vacantly into the water, wondering what had become of the other poor bastards in the van, when I first noticed it was moving almost imperceptibly. We might have been ambushed if not for that bit of luck. Guys? Let's get back from the water a bit. The moment we did, as though enraged by our audacity at moving beyond ambush range, something burst out of the deeper middle of the lagoon in a torrent of spray, halting just at the water's edge. We all scrambled back as whatever was obscured by the foam let out a monumental roar, the small wall of displaced water seething outwards and over our feet giving way to a beast that I thought was a myth, even with all the weird shit out here. It stood maybe 8 feet high at the shoulder, covered in short, thick fur entwined with algae and matted down by the black water of the Billabong. The shape was reminiscent of a giant sloth, or maybe a wombat, standing on 4 legs, all muscle and sinew, thick and stocky and strong. A broad head and a snubbed face held 2 wide-set yellow eyes, whilst the short snout boasted 2 scimitar-like teeth sweeping from the top jaw to below the bottom. It looked at us and bellowed again, pawing at the water in preparation for a charge. Mother of fuck, it's a dead-set fucking bunyip. Someone raised a rifle, and Dad barked a negative. That thing's built like a truck. All you'll do is piss the fucker off. Let's all slowly and quietly get back to the cruiser and just leave well enough alone, yeah? The bunyip stood there, snorting and snarling, weighing up the threat. We crept back to the car as meekly as we could, not wanting to incur the wrath of the beast any further. It glowered at us while we inched our way to relative safety, slinking into the car and quietly shutting the doors. Then I fired it up and all hell broke loose. As the old 4WD coughed to life, a shudder went through the beast. It lowered its head and bellowed again, and then it charged. I didn't even think, I just slammed the 4WD into gear and floored it, spinning around and roaring up the embankment as quickly as the old girl would take us. The rear view mirror was filled with churning soil and water. There was a terrible crash as the bunyip smashed through the already crushed van, and then we crested the rise and caught some speed. A terrifying roar rang out from behind us, and we were clear. We didn't know what to do for a bit, just kind of floating around and digesting what had happened. Dad got the cops out, but there wasn't much they could do. They listed the deaths as drownings. Sad that the real reason couldn't be given to the families, but it makes sense, I suppose. Like Dad said, there's always someone looking for a cheap thrill who is going to bite off a lot more than they can chew. The one survivor didn't remember a lot about what happened. She claimed that something yanked her under the water, and then the next thing she remembered was the road to the farmstead. All the billabongs are off limits to visitors these days. Now that we know for sure what's there, we can't let people go out there. As for the bunyip, it seems to keep to itself since. I don't know what riled it up so badly, but we eventually did go back out there and retrieve a few things for the families, and we were completely left alone. I did feel like it was watching me though, every ripple grabbing my full attention, fully expecting the appearance of the supposedly mythical animal. Someone, a few months later, suggested dynamiting the billabong, but Dad and I couldn't do it. It went against everything we stand for in terms of conservation, and we've genuinely got no idea how the thing would react anyway. So we leave him alone. I think it's for the best.